People often say that when you meet the love of your life, something in the universe shifts, like the stars pause for just a second, as if they too are holding their breath. But for me, it wasn't dramatic or poetic like that. It was quieter, almost shy, the kind of beginning that you only recognize as important when everything has already ended. I met Elise on a gray November afternoon. The sky was overcast, a typical city dusk with just enough light left to stain the windows of the university library. I had forgotten my charger and was muttering curses to myself, searching through my bag when she appeared beside me, offering her power bank with a small, uncertain smile. "You look like you're fighting the end of the world," she said. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, like if you spoke too loudly in return, you'd scare it away. I laughed awkwardly, not sure how to respond. "Feels like it, midterms." She didn't laugh. She just tilted her head and said, "Well, I hope you win." I didn't know then that I'd remember those words long after I forgot every exam score, that I'd cling to them like a talisman, trying to pretend they were a promise she made to stay. Her name was Elise. It took 3 more encounters before I dared ask her out for coffee. She always sat in the same corner of the library reading poetry or sketching little shapes in the margins of her notebooks. She wore the same faded denim jacket every day and carried a thermos with tea that smelled like jasmine. When we finally went on our first date, it rained. She didn't complain. In fact, she smiled and said, "I like it. Rain makes people honest." We sat in a tiny cafe where the lights were too dim and the coffee was terrible. She asked questions no one had ever asked me before, not about what I did, but why I did it, what scared me when I was little, what kind of silence I liked most. She was like that, quietly intense. She made the world feel slower, as if being around her was permission to exhale. That night, when I walked her home, we paused under a streetlight that flickered like it had seen too many goodbyes. She looked up at the clouds and said, "You ever feel like you're walking next to someone from a different life? Like you've known them before, just in another version of the world?" I looked at her, and I said, "Maybe this is the life we finally got right." She didn't answer. She just smiled. And I didn't know it then, but that smile would become the center of my entire world. We weren't perfect. In fact, we were a mess. She left her laundry unfolded for weeks. I talked too much when I was nervous. She had a habit of disappearing into her thoughts mid-conversation, and I had to learn not to take it personally. I'd cook something and forget the salt, and she'd always eat it anyway. She was forgetful with birthdays. I was stubborn with apologies, but it didn't matter, because every night we ended up in the same bed, her head tucked beneath my chin, her hand tangled in mine like roots in the earth. And in those moments, I believed we were infinite. We moved in together after a year. Our apartment was tiny, peeling walls, a leaking faucet, and windows that screamed during windstorms. But it was ours. We made it a home. With plants she always forgot to water and photos we kept meaning to frame. With lazy Sundays, tea-stained books, and the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. She once told me, "Love isn't in the fireworks. It's in the way someone remembers how you like your toast." And that's how she loved me, in the smallest, quietest ways. Looking back now, I wish I had held onto those days harder. memorized every sigh, every glance, every unfinished sentence. But when you think you have forever, you stop noticing the seconds slipping through your fingers. We had no idea that forever had an end date. But when it came like a thief, not with a bang, but with a cough. They say 6 years can pass in the blink of an eye, but when I look back on ours, it feels like an entire lifetime, folded into a handful of fragile memories. Elise drawing constellations in her notebook, as if trying to remember where we came from. I'd wake to find her asleep at her desk, her cheek smudged with graphite stars. She never finished those drawings. "The sky's too big," she'd say, yawning. "It feels dishonest to capture it." She was like that, a contradiction of gentle and stubborn, dreamy and grounded. I once told her she was the kind of person who didn't fit into this world because her soul belonged to another, older one. She smiled sadly, like she already knew she wasn't meant to stay long. And me, I was just a boy who loved her too much and too quietly. We had rituals. Every Sunday morning we'd walk to the same cafe, the one with the wobbly tables. Sometimes we'd talk for hours, other times we'd say nothing at all. I learned to read her silences, the way she pressed her lips when something hurt, the way she blinked too slowly when she was holding back tears. She hated loud places, so I learned to whisper my love in sticky notes on the fridge, in the way I remembered her favorite mug, in the way I'd let her rest her cold feet on mine at night and never complain. We fought, too, over small things that never mattered. Dishes, bills, how I never asked for directions, how she always got lost. But we never went to sleep angry. That was her rule. "The heart forgets by morning," she'd say, "but regret doesn't." She taught me how to hold grief before she ever left me. She wanted a house by the sea, not a big one, just enough space for books and tea and maybe a dog. She wanted to paint the walls soft green and hang wind chimes by the window. She wanted children. "Not now," she'd say, "but one day, when the world feels quieter." I said yes to everything, not because I had to, but because she was the only future I ever wanted. Sometimes at night she'd fall asleep on my chest, and I'd lie awake, memorizing the weight of her breathing. I'd trace my fingers along her spine, terrified that one day this would all be a memory. I didn't know then that I was already beginning to lose her. It started small. A faint bruise on her arm that never faded, a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. Then came the fatigue. She brushed it off, said she was just tired, working too much. But I saw it, the way she leaned on walls when she thought I wasn't looking, the way she winced when she lifted her arms. The night she fainted in the kitchen, I stopped pretending. I sat by her hospital bed while she slept, IV dripping slowly, sterile light washing her face pale. My fingers trembled as I held hers. It was the first time I prayed in years, not to any god in particular, just to something bigger than me. Please, not her. Please take anything else. Please don't take her. The test results came back 2 weeks later. The words didn't feel real. Acute myeloid leukemia. I remember the doctor's voice, clinical, practiced, detached, as if he were reading from a textbook, but all I could hear was the sound of Elisa's breath hitching beside me. She didn't cry right away. She just stared at the floor, blinking too fast, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. I tried to hold her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm not afraid of dying," she whispered. "I'm afraid of leaving you." And that was the moment my heart broke. In that whisper, that goddamn whisper, I saw our entire future unravel like thread. I wanted to be strong for her. I told her we'd fight, that we'd beat this, that she was young, healthy, a survivor. I said all the things people say when they're terrified of telling the truth. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't a battle we were going to win. We counted our days in hospital visits and blood tests. Our Sundays turned into sterile rooms, her head wrapped in scarves, her skin growing more translucent with every passing week. The cafe closed down. The plants in our apartment died. So did the laughter. But the love, it never faded. If anything, it grew more desperate, more tender, more real. She'd trace my face with trembling fingers and say, "I don't want you to remember me like this." And I'd whisper back, "This isn't how I'll remember you." I told her I loved her every day, not because I thought she'd forget, but because I was afraid of running out of chances. Some nights she'd cry in her sleep. I never woke her. I just held her tighter, as if my arms could stop time. But time didn't care. It never does. Grief, I've learned, doesn't begin with the final goodbye. It begins with the quiet unraveling, the slow disappearance of someone while they are still here, one breath at a time. With Elise, it began the day she stopped painting. She had always painted to escape. Fragments of skies, crumpled flowers, crooked little houses tucked beneath trees. Her world in color, her soul on canvas. But as a sickness grew inside her, her hands could no longer hold the brush steady. She'd stare at her unfinished work for hours, fingers curled, unable to move. Then one day she just put everything away. No goodbye, no final stroke, just silence. That's when I realized something inside her had shifted. She began pulling away, not cruelly but gently, like the ocean retreating from the shore. Her voice got softer, her smile smaller. She started asking me strange questions like, "Do you think people remember how you loved them after you're gone? Or, if souls do meet again, how will they know who they once were?" I always answered with what she wanted to hear. But the truth? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. And then came the night I can never forget. It was early spring, cold. Rain tapping against the window like distant weeping. I had just made her tea, chamomile with too much honey, the way she liked it when her throat hurt. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a gray blanket, the scarf on her head slipping. Her eyes looked too big for her face, bones too sharp beneath thin skin. I watched her stare at nothing for a long time. Then she said quietly, without looking at me, "I don't think I'll make it through the year." I froze. The cup in my hand trembled, spilling a little onto the floor. "Elise." "It's okay," she said, finally looking up. "I'm not afraid anymore. I just don't want to leave you unprepared." I dropped to my knees in front of her. "No," I whispered. "Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. We still have time. There's a new treatment, a trial in..." She placed a finger gently on my lips. "I know you're trying," she said. "You've always tried for me, but I need you to start letting me go, just a little." Letting go. How do you let go of someone who is your whole world? The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital corridors, whispered prayers, and the mechanical beeping of machines. I lost track of days. My world shrank to the sound of her breathing, the color of her skin, the hope that maybe tomorrow would be kinder, but it never was. Her body began to give up before her spirit did. She had to stop walking, then stop eating, then speaking. But she never stopped looking at me like I was the one thing in this world that still mattered. One night, she asked me to lie beside her in the hospital bed. "Just hold me," she murmured, her breath shallow. "Pretend we're back home." So I did. I held her close, my arms around her frail body, heart breaking with every heartbeat I felt through her chest. I whispered stories of the life we were supposed to have. The house by the sea, the garden, the laughter of little feet on wooden floors. She cried silently, and then, in a voice so faint I almost missed it, she said, "If I die before you, don't stay angry at the world. And don't stay angry at me." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep inside, I was angry, furious, at fate, at doctors, at time, at myself for not being enough to save her. But mostly, I was terrified, because the truth was, I didn't know how to be me without her. She was my language, my reason, my name. A few days later, she slipped into a coma. It wasn't sudden, more like a gentle dimming, her body too tired, her mind too heavy with pain. The doctors said she could still hear me, so I spoke to her every moment I could. I played her favorite songs, read her letters she'd written to herself as a teenager, kissed her fingers and told her how loved she was. But nothing could wake her, not even my tears. And on the 10th night, just after 3 a.m., I felt her hand grow colder in mine. I called her name. No answer. I kissed her forehead. No breath. I begged her to stay, but she was already gone. The moment Elise left this world, something in me broke. Not like glass, not like fire, but like the quiet collapse of a bridge you didn't know was holding you up. I sat there, holding her hand long after the nurses had covered her with a sheet, long after the machines had fallen silent. And in that silence, I realized I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid of life without her. The world didn't stop when Elise died. That was the cruelest part. People still walked their dogs, laughed at cafes, waited impatiently at red lights. The sun still rose like nothing had changed. Like the love of my life hadn't just vanished into the silence of the early morning. I wanted the world to pause. I wanted strangers to look at me and know, he's the one who lost her. He's the one walking with half a soul. But they didn't. They couldn't. And so I became invisible in my grief. I buried Elise on a rainy Tuesday. She had once told me that rain felt like the sky was mourning. That day the heavens wept until the earth was soft and heavy with sorrow. I stood alone beside her grave, holding the last letter she ever wrote me, still sealed in an envelope with trembling handwriting that said, "For when I'm gone." I couldn't bring myself to read it that day, not yet. Her parents stood nearby. Her mother cried so quietly, clutching Elise's childhood scarf like a lifeline. Her father didn't speak, just looked at me with eyes that were too full of grief to hold blame, but too empty to offer comfort. When it was over, when they had all left, I stayed behind, kneeling, soaked to the bone. And for the first time since Elise slipped away, I allowed myself to scream, not words, not names, just raw animal pain. It echoed through the empty cemetery, then vanished into the fog, unheard. The apartment became unbearable after that. Her scent lingered on pillows. Her slippers remained tucked beneath the bed. I found her hairbrush still tangled with strands of her golden hair, and it broke something in me. I fell asleep on the bathroom floor some nights because it was the only room that didn't feel like her. But the worst part? She was everywhere. In the photographs, in the books she underlined, in the chipped mug she loved because it reminded her of Paris. Yet she was nowhere. It was the loneliest kind of haunting. I tried to move on. I really did. Friends invited me out. I declined. Work sent emails. I ignored them. The world kept knocking on the door I refused to open. Some nights I stared at her old texts. Don't forget to eat today. I love you more than stars. When I get better, let's go to Kyoto. I left them unread, though I'd read them 100 times, pretending there was still something waiting, pretending she still existed on the other end of the thread. A month after her death, I finally opened her letter. I lit a candle, sat in the dark, and unfolded it with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Her handwriting was smaller, a little messier, written in pain but filled with love. My love, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to brush the hair from your eyes when you can't sleep. No longer there to kiss your shoulders when you doubt yourself. I hate that. I hate leaving you. But if souls have wings, I'll be flying beside you, always. Please don't let this be the end of you. You have too much left to live. Keep laughing, fall in love again. Travel to that place we promised each other, the bench in Kyoto under the cherry blossoms. And when you sit there, think of me. Smile. Let the wind carry my name. I will be waiting in the next life. I promise. Yours forever, Elise. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. I clutched that letter in my chest and whispered I'm sorry over and over, like it could change anything. But it couldn't. She was gone, and I was left behind, with her words like broken stars inside my ribs. The seasons changed, but inside me it stayed winter. People told me it would get easier. They lied. I didn't want it to get easier. I didn't want to forget the sound of her laughter, the way she called me love when she was sleepy, or how her eyes shimmered when she talked about forever. Letting go felt like betraying her, but holding on, that was killing me slowly. One night I dreamt of her. She stood on a bridge wearing her white summer dress, her hair dancing in the wind. She didn't speak, just looked at me with tears in her eyes. I tried to run to her, but the bridge kept stretching farther and farther. When I woke, my pillow was wet, and for the first time I said aloud, "Elise, I don't know how to live without you." The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Days blurred. I stopped marking the calendar. Time had no meaning without her. Some mornings I woke thinking she was in the kitchen making tea, only to find silence waiting for me. I tried to return to work. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared. Emails meant nothing. Deadlines felt like jokes. She used to bring me lunch when I forgot to eat. Now I skipped meals just to feel the hunger. At least it reminded me I was still alive. Everywhere I went, I saw Elise, not her body, but her presence. A girl on the train with the same laugh, a cafe that played her favorite song, the cherry blossom tree she once made me dance under in the rain. The memories weren't just painful, they were heavy, like carrying the world on my chest. I visited her grave often. I talked to her, not because I thought she could hear me, but because I needed to speak, and she was the only one who ever really listened. "I miss you," I whispered. Every time. One day, I placed a small paper crane on her headstone. She used to fold them when she was anxious. I folded 1,000, and still she didn't come back. Sometimes I hated the world for moving on. Other times I hated myself for still breathing. But the truth was simpler, quieter, and far more devastating. I loved her too much to let go, but I couldn't hold on to someone who no longer existed in this world. Spring arrived quietly. The cherry blossoms bloomed, just like she always wanted to see. And so, with a suitcase heavier than it should have been, I boarded a flight to Kyoto, alone. It was our dream, ours, but only I came. The air was soft in Kyoto, tinged with pink petals and faint rain. Couples held hands, children laughed beneath the trees, and I sat on the wooden bench she once pointed to in a travel magazine, whispering, "One day, let's sit here together." I was sitting there now, but she wasn't. I opened her letter again. "Sit beneath the blossoms, smile, let the wind carry my name." The wind stirred gently. I didn't smile. I wept, openly, quietly, like the trees understood, like the petals fell just for her. I walked the paths we'd planned, shrines, riversides, hidden gardens. I took photos she would have loved. I spoke to her in the quiet moments, told her how much it hurt, how lonely the world had become, how much I needed her still. At night, in the hotel, I held her scarf and listened to a recording of her laughter, not because I forgot the sound, but because it was all I had left. On my last day, I bought a single white lily, her favorite flower. I left it beneath the cherry tree on that bench. "I came," I whispered. "I kept my promise, but it wasn't supposed to be like this." And then for a brief moment, I felt her, in the wind, in the sunlight, through the blossoms, like a memory returning to touch me one last time. I returned home. But home no longer meant anything. It was just a place where her absence echoed louder than anything else. I kept living, quietly, mechanically, not because I healed, I didn't, but because grief becomes a rhythm, a slow, painful song you learn to move with. People around me moved on. They fell in love, got married, had children, and I smiled when they showed me photos. But deep down, I was still holding Elise's hand. In another time, another world. Sometimes I wonder what she would have looked like at 30, or how she would have laughed at our future children's silly jokes, or how her voice would have sounded reading bedtime stories. So many promises, so many somedays, all buried with her. But when the nights grow still, when the wind rustles the trees outside, I close my eyes and speak to her softly. If there's a next life, let's find each other early. Let's not wait so long. Let's not waste time. And this time, I'll keep every promise. I no longer ask the universe to bring her back. I just ask that it remembers our love, that somewhere, somehow, it lives on, because love like ours doesn't die. It lingers, it aches, it waits, and maybe, just maybe, it returns.